My name is Maya Johnson, and this is the story of how the worst day of my life became the foundation for everything I achieved afterward. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My wedding day to Marcus Wellington, a man I thought loved me for who I was, not what I had or didn't have. I remember standing in front of the small mirror in my cramped apartment, adjusting the simple white dress I'd bought from a thrift store and altered myself. My hands were shaking, not from excitement, but from the phone call I'd received just an hour before. Marcus's voice still echoed in my ears. "Maya, I can't do this. My family. They think you're not suitable. You're a cook, for God's sake. You work in other people's kitchens. What will people think?" 24 years old, working 3 jobs to make ends meet. And the man I loved was calling off our wedding because I wasn't wealthy enough for his family's standards. Marcus came from old money. His grandfather had built a real estate empire, and his family owned half the commercial properties in downtown Atlanta. Me? I was the daughter of a single mother who cleaned offices at night and took care of elderly folks during the day. I hung up that phone and sat on my bed, staring at the wall for what felt like hours. The small bouquet of daisies I'd picked from my neighbor's garden sat wilting on my nightstand. 50 guests were supposed to show up at the community center we'd rented for $300. I had to call each one and tell them the wedding was off. But as I made those calls, something shifted inside me. With each conversation, each expression of sympathy, each "I'm so sorry, honey," I felt my sadness transforming into something else entirely: determination. By the time I called my cousin Jennifer, who was supposed to be my maid of honor, I wasn't crying anymore. "Maya, are you okay?" Jennifer asked after I told her the news. "You know what, Jen? I think I'm going to be better than okay," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "I'm going to show Marcus and his family exactly what they threw away." The day after my non-wedding, I went back to work at Meridian Country Club, where I'd been working as a prep cook for 2 years. The head chef, Antoine Dubois, was a tough French man who rarely gave compliments, but he'd always acknowledged that I had natural talent. While other prep cooks struggled with basic knife skills, I could brunoise vegetables with precision and speed that impressed even the line cooks. "Maya," Antoine called to me as I walked into the kitchen that Monday morning. "You look different. What happened?" I told him about Marcus, about the cancelled wedding, about how I'd been dismissed as just a cook. Antoine listened, nodding occasionally, his weathered face thoughtful. "You know," he said when I finished, "my grandmother always told me that the kitchen is where miracles happen, not just with food but with life. You want to show this fool what he lost? Then cook like your life depends on it." That afternoon, Antoine did something unprecedented. He let me work the hotline during the lunch rush. The country club was hosting a business luncheon for 150 people, and I was terrified. But as I moved between the sauté pans and the grill, something magical happened. All the pain, all the rejection, all the anger, it transformed into focus. Every dish that left my station was perfect. The club manager, Mrs. Patterson, came into the kitchen afterward with a concerned expression. My heart sank, thinking I'd messed up somehow. Instead, she said, "Chef Dubois, I've had 12 people ask me who cooked their salmon today. They said it was the best they'd ever had at the club." Antoine smiled. The first time I'd seen him truly smile in 2 years. "That was Maya," he said simply. Mrs. Patterson looked at me with new eyes. "Maya, would you be interested in taking some culinary classes? The club has a professional development fund." That night, I researched culinary schools online until 3 a.m. The Culinary Institute of Atlanta had a part-time program designed for working professionals. The tuition was $8,000, more money than I'd ever seen in one place. But as I looked at the course descriptions, at the photos of students learning from master chefs, I knew this was my path forward. Getting into culinary school while working 3 jobs was like trying to juggle fire while riding a unicycle. I kept my prep cook position at the country club, continued my weekend catering gigs, and picked up Friday night shifts at a downtown restaurant called Blue Moon Bistro. Every penny I earned went toward tuition, books, and the professional knife set I'd need for classes. My fellow students were mostly young kids fresh out of high school, funded by their parents' credit cards. I was the oldest in most of my classes, definitely the only one who showed up, still smelling faintly of the industrial dishwasher from my morning shift. But I had something they didn't: hunger. Not for food, but for knowledge, for validation, for proof that I belonged in professional kitchens. Chef Maria Santos taught my fundamentals class. She was a tiny Puerto Rican woman who had worked her way up through some of New York's most prestigious kitchens before moving to Atlanta to teach. On the first day, she made us introduce ourselves and explain why we wanted to be chefs. When it was my turn, I stood up and said, "My name is Maya Johnson. I want to be a chef because someone told me I was just a cook, and I want to show the world the difference." Chef Santos nodded approvingly. "Good answer," she said. "Anger can be excellent fuel, but remember, eventually, you need to cook for love, not revenge." The coursework was brutal. Food safety, nutrition, classical French techniques, menu planning, cost control, subjects I'd never even thought about while working prep shifts. But I absorbed everything like a sponge. I practiced knife cuts until my fingers bled. I memorized mother sauces and their derivatives. I learned to butcher whole chickens, fillet fish, and make pasta from scratch. 6 months into the program, Chef Santos pulled me aside after class. "Maya, you're ready for something bigger than what you're doing. There's a position opening at Harvest Moon. It's one of the best farm-to-table restaurants in the city. The chef, David Kim, is looking for a junior sous chef. I recommended you." Harvest Moon was in a different league from anywhere I'd worked before. The servers wore black uniforms and could describe the provenance of every ingredient on the plate. The kitchen was pristine, organized like a military operation, and Chef David Kim was a James Beard Award winner who had worked at French Laundry before opening his own place. My interview was actually a working interview, a 4-hour shift during their busy Saturday night service. I was assigned to work guard manger, preparing salads and cold appetizers. The pace was insane, easily triple what I was used to at the country club. Orders flew in faster than I could read them, and the other cooks worked with a precision and speed that was almost balletic. Halfway through the shift, I was drowning. Orders were backing up, my mise en place was running low, and I could feel the eyes of the other cooks on me. This was my chance, and I was blowing it. Then I remembered something Antoine had told me months earlier. When you feel overwhelmed, focus on one dish at a time. Cook with love, not fear. I took a deep breath, organized my station, and started moving with purpose instead of panic. One salad at a time, one plate at a time. By the end of the shift, I was not only keeping up but actually ahead of the tickets. Chef Kim approached me as I was cleaning my station. "Maya, right? Maria told me about you. You started rough tonight, but you finished strong. That tells me more about a cook than natural talent ever could. The position pays $42,000 a year plus benefits. When can you start?" I wanted to cry, to laugh, to call my mother, to find Marcus and show him this moment. Instead, I simply said, "Monday morning, chef." Working at Harvest Moon was like attending graduate school in a blast furnace. Chef Kim demanded perfection, not just in execution, but in understanding. He wanted us to know not just how to make a dish, but why each ingredient was chosen, how the flavors interacted, what the customer would experience with each bite. I threw myself into the work with everything I had. I arrived early and stayed late. I studied cookbooks like they were religious texts. I tasted everything, asked questions constantly, and volunteered for every special event and catering gig the restaurant took on. After 18 months, Chef Kim promoted me to sous chef. I was making $55,000 a year, more money than my mother had ever made in her best year. But more than the money, I felt the respect of my peers. The line cooks looked to me for guidance. My food was featured on the restaurant's Instagram account. Local food bloggers started mentioning me in their reviews. It was during this time that I started developing my own style. While Harvest Moon was known for refined, minimalist presentations, I found myself drawn to the bold flavors of my childhood, the spice blends my mother used, the techniques I'd learned from my grandmother before she passed. I started experimenting with fusion dishes that combined classical French techniques with Southern soul food and African flavors. Chef Kim noticed. "Maya, your personal style is coming through in your cooking," he said one day after tasting my version of coq au vin, which I'd made with jerk seasoning and collard greens. "It's time you started thinking about your own place." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. My own restaurant? I was barely 27 years old, and I'd only been cooking professionally for 3 years. But Chef Kim connected me with a mentor, Chef Patricia Williams, who had opened 4 successful restaurants in Atlanta and was one of the few black women to achieve prominence in the city's culinary scene. "Baby girl," Patricia said when we met for coffee, "talent isn't enough in this business. You need business sense, financial backing, and skin thick enough to deflect all the people who are going to tell you that you don't belong. But if you're willing to work for it, really work for it, I'll help you." Patricia became my unofficial business school professor. She taught me how to read financial statements, how to calculate food costs, how to negotiate with vendors, how to manage staff. We met every Sunday morning at 6 a.m. at a diner near her house, and she would quiz me on profit margins and labor costs while we ate breakfast. "The food is the easy part," she told me. "Any talented chef can make delicious food. The hard part is making money while you do it, treating your staff well, and building something sustainable." While I was learning the business side, I was also working on my concept. I wanted to create a restaurant that told the story of African diaspora cuisine, dishes that traced the journey of ingredients and techniques from West Africa through the Caribbean and the American South. I called it Roots and Roots. The menu I developed was unlike anything in Atlanta at the time. Dishes like Burberry spiced duck breast with sweet potato puree and collard green chimichurri, jollof risotto with Gulf shrimp and andouille, plantain gnocchi with goat curry and pickled okra. Each dish had a story, connections between cultures that had been forced apart but maintained their culinary links. I started testing the concept through pop-up dinners. Patricia helped me get space in her restaurants on slow nights, and I would cook 8-course tasting menus for 30 or 40 guests. The response was incredible. Food critics started paying attention. Atlanta magazine wrote a piece about emerging chefs, and I was featured prominently. But I still needed money to open my own place. A lot of money. I had managed to save about $30,000, but even a small restaurant would require at least $300,000 to open properly. I applied for small business loans and was rejected by every bank I approached. As a young black woman with no collateral and limited credit history, I was considered too risky. That's when something unexpected happened. Mrs. Patterson, the manager from Meridian Country Club, called me. "Maya, I've been following your career, and I'm so proud of what you've accomplished," she said. "I'm retiring next year, and I've been thinking about what to do with my savings. Would you be interested in having an investor?" Mrs. Patterson had been quietly investing in real estate and stocks for 30 years. She offered to invest $200,000 in exchange for a 20% stake in my future restaurant. It wasn't enough to fully fund the project, but it was a start. Word of my search for investors spread through Atlanta's food community. Within 6 months, I had assembled a group of 5 investors, including Patricia, Mrs. Patterson, and 3 other local business owners who believed in my vision. Together, they put up $400,000. Finding the right location took 8 months. I looked at dozens of spaces, former restaurants, converted houses, strip mall storefronts. Nothing felt right until my realtor showed me a 3,000 square foot space in the old Fourth Ward, a historically black neighborhood that was experiencing a renaissance. The space had been a jazz club in the 1962nd, then various restaurants over the decades. It had good bones, exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, high ceilings. But it needed everything. A complete kitchen build-out, new electrical and plumbing, dining room renovation. My budget was tight, but Patricia knew contractors who believed in the project and were willing to work for reduced fees in exchange for equity. The build-out took 4 months longer than planned and cost $50,000 more than budgeted. There were nights I lay awake, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I was 29 years old, responsible for $500,000 in investor money, and about to open a restaurant in one of the most competitive food cities in the South. During construction, I hired my core team. My sous chef Kevin had worked with me at Harvest Moon and was eager to be part of something new. My front-of-house manager, Tasha, had managed some of the best restaurants in Atlanta and brought both experience and connections. My pastry chef, Amélie, was a young French woman who specialized in desserts that incorporated African and Caribbean flavors. 3 weeks before opening, we held our first full practice service for friends, family, and industry colleagues. It was a disaster. The kitchen wasn't coordinated, servers didn't know the menu well enough to answer questions, and we ran out of food halfway through the night. I went home and cried for the first time in months. Patricia found me the next morning, still in yesterday's chef coat, passed out at my kitchen table with menu printouts scattered around me. "Get up," she said firmly. "You think every successful restaurant opens perfectly? I've opened 4 restaurants, and each one was a hot mess for the first month. The difference between restaurants that succeed and restaurants that fail isn't perfection, it's persistence." We spent the next 3 weeks drilling, practice service every night with different groups of volunteers, menu training for servers, kitchen drills until every cook could execute every dish in their sleep. By opening night, we were ready. The 14th of February, 2019. Valentine's Day. It seemed like an appropriate day to introduce Atlanta to something I loved so deeply. We had been sold out for 2 weeks. The preview coverage in local publications had generated more interest than I dared hope for. I arrived at the restaurant at 10 a.m., 6 hours before we were scheduled to open for our first service. The dining room looked beautiful, warm lighting, fresh flowers on every table, artwork by local black artists on the walls. The kitchen was spotless and organized, every ingredient prepped and ready. My hands were shaking as I put on my chef coat. This was it. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, everything I had dreamed about since that devastating phone call from Marcus 3 years earlier. The first customers arrived at 4 p.m. exactly, a young couple celebrating their anniversary. They ordered the tasting menu, and I personally expedited every course that went to their table. When they finished their dessert, Amélie's chocolate tart with hibiscus sorbet and candied plantains, they asked to speak with the chef. I walked to their table, nervous and proud. "Chef Johnson," the woman said, "that was one of the most extraordinary meals of my life. Thank you for creating something so beautiful." The rest of the evening flew by. We served 120 guests over 2 seatings, and every dish that left the kitchen met my standards. The servers were knowledgeable and professional. The wine pairings were perfect. By 11 p.m., when we served our last dessert, I knew we had succeeded. The reviews started appearing within days. Atlanta Magazine gave us 4 stars. The city's most respected food critic called the restaurant a revelatory exploration of African diaspora cuisine. Food and Wine magazine featured us in their Best New Restaurants issue. Within 3 months, we had a 2-month waiting list for reservations. The success of Roots and Roots opened doors I had never imagined existed. Food Network invited me to compete on Chopped, which I won, donating the $10,000 prize to a scholarship fund for culinary students from underrepresented communities. I was invited to cook at the James Beard House in New York City. Southern Living magazine put me on their cover as one of the new voices of Southern cuisine. But the moment that meant the most to me came 6 months after opening. I was in the kitchen during a busy Saturday night service when Tasha told me there was someone at table 12 who wanted to speak with me. I was in the middle of expediting orders and almost sent Kevin instead, but something made me walk to the dining room myself. Sitting at table 12 was Marcus Wellington, the man who had broken my heart and inadvertently changed my life. He was with a woman I didn't recognize. Blonde, perfectly dressed, clearly from his social circle. They had just finished the tasting menu. "Maya," he said, standing awkwardly as I approached. This is incredible. I had no idea you could cook like this." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in 3 years. He looked smaller somehow, less significant than he had in my memory. The man who had once seemed so important, whose opinion had once mattered so much, was just another customer in my restaurant. "Thank you," I said simply. "I hope you enjoyed your meal." "Maya, he started, but I cut him off gently. "Marcus, I'm glad you came tonight. I hope the food gave you a sense of what you helped me discover about myself. If you'll excuse me, I need to get back to my kitchen." As I walked away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Gratitude for the heartbreak that had forced me to find my strength. Gratitude for the rejection that had taught me my worth didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Gratitude for the path that had led me to this moment, this place, this life I had built with my own hands. By year 2, Roots and Roots was not just successful, it was profitable, really profitable. We were booked solid 3 months in advance, and I was turning away catering requests because we couldn't handle the volume. My investors had already made their money back, and I was earning more than I had ever imagined possible. But I wasn't content to rest on my success. I had learned from Patricia that successful restaurateurs think beyond their first location. I started developing concepts for expansion, but not just more restaurants. I wanted to build something bigger, something that could create opportunities for other people who looked like me. My second venture was a fast casual concept called Maya's Kitchen, which brought some of the flavors and techniques from Roots and Roots to a more accessible price point. We opened the first location in a food hall downtown, and it was an immediate success. Lines wrapped around the corner, and we were selling out of food by 2 p.m. every day. The third venture was something entirely different, a line of spice blends and sauces that captured the essence of African diaspora cuisine. I partnered with a co-packer in Georgia and launched Maya's Roots product line through local Whole Foods stores. Within 6 months, we expanded to regional distribution, and a year later, the products were available in specialty stores across the Southeast. Each success built on the last. The spice line funded the opening of 3 more Maya's Kitchen locations. The casual restaurants generated cash flow that allowed me to expand Roots and Roots into a larger space with a private dining room. By year 3, I was employing 47 people across my various ventures. But the project I was most proud of was the Roots and Roots Scholarship Program. Working with local culinary schools, we provided full scholarships to students from underrepresented communities who wanted to pursue careers in the culinary arts. Each year, we sponsored 10 students, and several graduates had come to work in my restaurants. Year 4 brought recognition I had never dreamed of. I was nominated for a James Beard Award for Outstanding Chef. I didn't win, but being nominated put me in the company of chefs I had idolized for years. Food and Wine named me one of their best new chefs, and I was invited to cook at events around the country. The business had grown beyond what I could manage alone. I brought in a CEO, Sarah Chen, who had experience scaling restaurant companies. I hired a head of operations, a marketing director, and a financial controller. What had started as my personal dream had become a company that employed over 100 people and generated $8 million in annual revenue. The moment when the magnitude of what I had built truly hit me was during our 4th anniversary celebration at Roots and Roots. I was standing in the kitchen, watching my team, many of whom had been with me since the beginning, execute service flawlessly without my direct involvement. Kevin, my original sous chef, was now the executive chef and had developed several new dishes that had become customer favorites. My mother was sitting at the chef's table, wearing a dress I had bought her for the occasion. She had been my biggest supporter through everything, never questioning my decision to leave stable jobs for uncertain dreams. Watching her taste the tasting menu, seeing the pride in her eyes as other guests asked to meet the chef's mother, I felt overwhelmed by how far we had come. After service, I gathered my team in the dining room for our traditional family meal and staff meeting. But this time, I had something special to announce. 4 years ago, I began, I started this restaurant with a broken heart and a point to prove. Tonight, I want to tell you that we've proven whatever we needed to prove. We've built something beautiful together, something that matters. And because of that, I'm excited to announce that every full-time employee who has been with us for more than 2 years is receiving equity in the company. You helped build this, and you deserve to share in its success. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Several people were crying, including me. These people had believed in my vision when it was just an idea, had worked long hours for less money than they could make elsewhere, had helped turn a dream into an empire. Today, as I write this story, I'm 33 years old and the CEO of Maya's Hospitality Group, which includes 4 restaurant concepts, a retail product line, and a catering company. We're about to open our first location outside of Georgia, in Nashville, and I'm working on a cookbook that tells the story of African diaspora cuisine through recipes and family histories. But more than the business success, more than the awards and recognition, I'm proud of what we've created in terms of opportunity and community. Our restaurants have launched the careers of dozens of young chefs and servers. Our scholarship program has helped 34 students attend culinary school. We source ingredients from local farms, including several owned by immigrants and refugees who are growing traditional African vegetables for our menus. Sometimes I think about Marcus and that phone call that changed everything. I harbor no anger toward him anymore. In fact, I'm grateful for the clarity his rejection provided. He showed me that I was looking for validation in the wrong place. The only approval that mattered was my own, and the respect I could earn through excellence and hard work. I learned that success isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right. It's about having the courage to bet on your own talent and vision, even when the odds seem impossible. It's about surrounding yourself with people who believe in your potential and are willing to work alongside you to achieve it. The restaurant industry is brutal, unforgiving, and filled with failure, but it's also one of the few places where talent and hard work can still overcome almost any disadvantage. Where someone who starts as a prep cook can build an empire if they're willing to pay the price in long hours, burned fingers, and relentless pursuit of perfection. Last month, I received an invitation to speak at the graduation ceremony for the Culinary Institute of Atlanta, the same program where I had learned the fundamentals that changed my life. Standing at the podium, looking out at the faces of new graduates, young and old, from all backgrounds and circumstances, I thought about what I wanted them to know. Your journey in this industry will not be easy, I told them. You will face rejection, criticism, and moments when you question whether you're good enough, whether you belong, whether your dreams are too big. But I want you to remember that every great chef started exactly where you are now, with knife skills, basic techniques, and hunger to prove themselves. The only difference between those who succeed and those who don't is persistence. Keep cooking, keep learning, keep believing in yourself even when others don't. After the ceremony, a young black woman approached me. She introduced herself as Jasmine, and she told me she had been following my career since the early days of Roots and Roots. "Chef Johnson," she said, "I just wanted to say thank you. Seeing what you've accomplished made me believe that someone like me could make it in this industry. I start my externship at a fine dining restaurant next week, and I'm terrified but excited." I looked at Jasmine and saw myself 7 years earlier, young, talented, hungry, and uncertain about where the path would lead. I gave her my card and told her to call me if she ever needed advice or encouragement. As I drove home that night, I thought about the circle of mentorship that had shaped my career. Antoine, who first recognized my potential. Patricia, who taught me the business side of restaurants. Chef Kim, who pushed me to develop my own style. Mrs. Patterson, who believed in me enough to invest her retirement savings. Sarah, who helped me scale the business beyond what I could manage alone. Each of them had seen something in me before I saw it in myself. Now I have the opportunity to be that person for others, to look at young cooks and see not just who they are, but who they could become. The girl who stood in that cramped apartment 7 years ago, holding a wilted bouquet and a broken heart, could never have imagined the life I live today. But she had something that made all of this possible. She refused to accept other people's limitations on her potential. She chose to transform her pain into purpose, her rejection into resilience, her heartbreak into hope. That's the real lesson of this story. Not that revenge is sweet, though success is certainly the best response to those who doubt you. The real lesson is that our greatest setbacks often become the foundation for our greatest comebacks. That the moments when we feel smallest can be the moments when we discover just how large our capacity for growth really is. I am Maya Johnson, chef and entrepreneur, but most importantly, I am living proof that no dream is too big if you're willing to work for it, one day, one dish, one decision at a time.